Given that you are basing this... sorry about that. Given that you are basing this Federal Health Board on the Federal Reserve banking system, no doubt we need to examine that more critically. And the Federal Reserve System has doing it today, artificially expanding the money supply, creating a hidden tax called inflation, raising and lowering interest rates at will, which is creating malinvestment, boom and bust cycles as we're seeing today, also creating moral hazard. That's engaging in reckless risk-taking on the assumption that the government will bail you out. And above all, the Federal Reserve System is not required to be audited. And until recently, the Federal Open Market Committee minutes were not released. Their meetings were held in secret. I've heard you repeatedly say that the Federal Reserve System is accountable and reasonably regulated. Given the things I've just said, could you help me understand how that is?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
First of all, I hope I made clear tonight, I said that we need to take aspects of the FAA and aspects of the Federal Reserve and meld them. And I made quite a point of arguing that the transparency of the FAA is essential to the transparency required in the Federal Health Board. I don't think there could be any more transparency than what we see in aviation today, and as a result of the extraordinary transparency and the application of best practices, that we are in a very good position to understand how mistakes happen. I would argue that the best part of the Federal Reserve Board is their political autonomy and the extraordinary expertise that they bring. And I would also argue that we may not have gotten through this last month nearly as well as we did had it not been for the Federal Reserve. Now, what I would argue, like you just did in your question, there needs to be a lot more transparency with the Federal Reserve as well. And so my ideal board would be to merge this autonomy with this transparency in the Federal Aviation Administration, and only in that hybrid system will we ultimately get the best result. I also believe, however, that what the Federal Reserve brings is, and what the FAA brings, is a level of expertise and a level of management that the Congress simply can't provide. We couldn't possibly expect. And I would simply add one final aspect to the answer to your good question, which is it was the Congress that deregulated the banking system over the objections, in many cases, of the Federal Reserve. They can only implement the laws as Congress creates them. They don't have the luxury of making their own law. They are subject to the laws of the land like everyone else. That is true of aviation as well, of course. And so it's imperative that as we put this federal system together and delegate the responsibility, we make it transparent, we make it responsive, we make it autonomous, but most importantly, we get the policy right as well. I would argue that the policy in our banking system has been a disaster the last couple of decades, in large measure because we deregulated in 1998 over the objections, actually in 88 and in 98, over the objections many of us had to that at the time. But it was that deregulatory framework and the lack of adequate oversight as a result, combined with the lack of transparency, that brought us to these cataclysmic circumstances we face today. It's a very good question. Well, listen, thank you all very much. You've been